This is the calibration training for how to calibrate your system optically for measurement. So in order to calibrate the system at the first time, you would click on the OVM software and it will launch the software. When the software comes in, right now you'll notice in the x-axis it's a very large number, and the software needs to be told what the machine zero is. So there's a reference mark on the glass scale about in the center of the stage that tells you where the machine zero is. So we need to set that for calibration. So when we click on this button up here to manually move the stage in the X and Y direction, that will give us the opportunity to move the stage to the left and to the right so it finds that reference mark on the glass scale in the x-axis. So we'll say OK. We can use the quick release to manually move it from left to right, and once it finds that mark it says the x-axis is completed. And now we'll do the same in the Y direction. So once we're prepared, we can use the quick release, click OK, and move the system in the X and the Y direction until it finds the reference mark on the Y-axis. So it now asks us to choose the calibrated file. So we're going to get familiar with where those files are located. Down here is the menu, which you can pull up to say which setting on the zoom lens you're on. So you'll notice markings or detents on the zoom lens which range from 0.7 to 1.0x, and this is where you would change that manually to tell it what setting you've zoomed to. So at first we're going to go zoom down on the zoom lens to the 1x position, and we're going to use the glass scale that's supplied with the Science-Scope system to find the reference circle. And so what we have here is we have a bunch of different artifacts that are of known size, which are the 5mm, 2.5, and 1mm accordingly. So since we're at lower magnification here, we adjust the focus to get the circle in focus, and we place the circle in the upper right quadrant here. So basically if you had a clock, it'd be at 2 o'clock. So what's going to happen is when we're calibrating, it's going to fire the edge detection from the center of the crosshair out, find an edge, and calculate the location of that edge. So we've got it set to 1. What we do is we come up here to Setup and we go to Calibration. You'll see a sub-menu pop up that says Calibration, and we do an image calibration and we do a magnification calibration. So this is where you can load or save calibration files, which is what we're going to do. There's a file saved for each position on the lens. So we do magnification calibration. It says, do you want to calibrate? I say yes. And you'll notice a blue arrow that's pointing from the center of the crosshair outward to find an edge. So basically once we have this circle in position, we can click anywhere within the inside of this circle and it will fire the edge detection outward. So I left click, and if it finds an edge, it now positions the arrow to go to the 4 o'clock position. So I manually move the stage and do the same thing and present the 5mm circle in the lower right quadrant. I left click, and then it moves to the 7 o'clock position. So we manually move it to the 7 o'clock position. Once we're there, we left click inside that circle, and now we move it back to the 11 o'clock position. So again, the arrow is telling us where it's looking. Once we left click here, all the quadrants have been completed, and then I right click and it will say calibration succeeded. So by right clicking, you tell it that you're done taking those 4 quadrants. So now that calibration for this magnification is stored in the RAM memory, but we have not saved it to disk. So what we want to do is we want to go back up to Setup, go to Calibration, Image Calibration, and we go Save Calibrated File. And there's basically 12 positions of calibration that we can save it in. I'm going to use file number 1 for setting number 1, so that when somebody zooms the system and looks on the zoom lens and sees that it's set at 1, then you can call up the calibrated file number 1. Here's where you have the ability to name that. You could name it low, high, but I'm going to name it 1x zoom. 0.1x, 1x zoom. And that's the title that's going to be on my calibration for that selection. So if I come down here to the menu, you'll see that my first position, or cal number 1, is set at 1x zoom. So as long as I measure anywhere within the 1x zoom and do not change the zoom position, the software will know the calibration or the pixel size, and I can simply start making my measurements. So for example, if I go to the circle tool and I left click in the single point circle tool, you'll notice up here in the results window it's dead on, 2.500 millimeters. So a very accurate way of doing that. So let's do another one, and you'll get the idea of how to do all 4 or 5 positions within your zoom range. So we'll do one more. I'm now going to zoom to the number 2 setting on the lens. I'm going to position that diameter in the upper right quadrant and focus to get a sharp edge. And because I have a circle from before, you can see when you zoom the pixel size becomes different. So we're going to come over here and delete all measurements that we've taken. So again, we're going to calibrate now for the number 2 position. So we're going to calibrate for this position. I'm going to recalibrate and change the name to 2x zoom. So let's go through that process again. We come up to setup, we go to calibration, we go to image calibration and magnification calibration. It asks us, do we want to calibrate? We say yes, and there's our arrow again asking for the 2 o'clock position. So I left click within that circle, move it down to the 4 o'clock position, left click, go to 7 o'clock, left click, and go up to 11 o'clock and left click. When done with all 4 positions, we right click to say finish, and it says calibration succeeds. Okay, so again, we've now overwritten the first calibration we did in RAM memory. So in the memory of the computer, we need to store that calibration for this number 2 setting. So again, we go to setup, calibration, image calibration, and save calibrated file for number 2. So the first one we've saved, number 2 is here. We're going to call that 2x zoom. Say OK. So now anytime we want to use the 2x zoom, we can load that calibration file. We can then go and, as we did before, use a automatic edge detection tool to measure that dimension. And again, in the results window, we can see that's within 1 micron. So very accurate way to do it. So basically, you do that for all positions on your zoom lens when you first set the machine up, or if annually you want to recalibrate, or if a measurement is not seeming to be correct, you can recalibrate and double check yourself with the known standard. I generally do the lowest position, which is a 0.7x setting on the zoom lens, last, or at calibration position number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or at the bottom of the list, because the lower the magnification, the lower your ability to accurately measure. So generally you don't, this is the 0.7 setting, you generally don't want to be at this position. So I would generally use the 1 or 2x unless you need much higher magnification. So if I set the lens on 1, say 1x zoom, load that calibration file, and now we're at the 1x setting for calibration. So this will give you a feel for how to calibrate or check your calibration at any time using a known standard, and I think you'll find this a very easy to use and quick and easy way to make sure your system is in calibration.